Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome, welcome. If you want to use the chat and let us know where you are tuning in from, that is fun. All right, and we're going to just let a few more people tune in here and then we'll get started. Brad from Brooklyn. We were just talking about you. Your ears were probably burning. Shayla from Ballard, Katie from the Central District, Patty from First Hill. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Kendra from Bellevue. Hi, Kendra. All right, we will go ahead and get started. I'm Laura Hamilton. Thank you so much for joining us today. I have a bookshop here in Seattle, a cookbook shop called Book Larder. And in normal circumstances, we do a whole lot of author talks and cooking classes. So we have taken all of that to Zoom over the past several months. And so appreciate you joining us on this journey. It's been really great because we've gotten to do events like this one, where I'm in Seattle, our interviewer Robert is in New York, and our author is actually in the UK. So, you know, we'll make the most of it and try to see the upside of these things. Plus, as you know, I just saw as people were tuning in, you guys are tuning in from all over the world. And so I really, really appreciate that. Thank you. We are thrilled to welcome Dave Broome today. He is the author of Gin, How to Drink It. This is a new version of his classic book. And it is 4 ways of drinking gin with lots and lots of gins included in the book. And so he is going to talk about the book with Robert Simonson, who is a book author himself and also a drinks columnist for the New York Times. They are going to talk about the book, which is available at booklarder.com. And we appreciate you supporting this event by purchasing it from us if you are choosing to do so. They will also take questions. So please use the Q&A button on Zoom to ask questions. And that will make it easier for Robert to keep track of what you are interested in. All right, so I'm going to ask Dave and Robert to join us now. Hi, Dave.
Oh, hello.
And I'm going to disappear and turn it over to you.
Bye-bye. Hi, Dave.
Hi.
Nice to see you. Nice to see anybody these days. Congratulations on your book.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good. And let's just show it to the people here. This is the new book, Gin and How to Drink It by Dave Broome. Oh, he has one too, of course.
Oh, yeah.
So I have your previous gin book, of which this is an expansion and an updating. So my first question for you, when this came through the mail, I was a bit surprised because it was only 5 years after you published the first gin book. So please tell me, why did you need to update it so soon?
Yeah, it kind of surprised me. I must admit, when my publisher first said, maybe we should update the gin book. But gin's just been going crazy. It's like the fastest growing spirit category at the moment. And there are so many new gins appearing in the market. It kind of made sense to try and keep pace, roughly speaking, with what is happening out there in the market. And also, I was very aware with the first edition, it was pretty much at the start of the new gin wave. And there was a lot of gins which had just appeared as the book came out, which I wanted to come in. And also, I think one of the themes which emerged, which we might talk about later, is that the way in which gin is spread around the world. And you're now beginning to see really quite distinct styles emerging in Australia or Japan or wherever. So, and also revival in Geneva. So there was actually a host of reasons. Once I kind of stepped back and looked at it, there was a host of reasons for revising it, adding 82 new gins, and even then only scratching the surface.
Yes. as you mentioned, it really has. I mean, your book was very prescient when it came out because gin has only grown since then.
Hmm.
And we tend traditionally to think of gin as a spirit that's drunk in certain nations, obviously in England, popular in America, popular in Spain. But as you mentioned, it's now quite a sensation. It's in Germany, in Japan, in Australia.
Yep.
Why do you think this is? Why has gin caught fire in so many different lands across the globe?
I think one of the reasons for the gin revival is it's almost like taking it back to why gin declined in the first place. So gin declined around about the same time Scotch whiskey went into decline, which is really in the 1980s. And there was this kind of generational shift away from old traditional spirits, spirits that were seen as being old fashioned. So the spirits that your parents drank or your grandparents drank. And the vodka generation came along, and what the vodka generation wanted were drinks which were very pure, very clean, really with very little flavor. They had effect, but they had very little flavor. Purity and clarity were kind of the buzzwords and real motivations for buying spirits in those days. But over the past few years, what you've begun to see is people becoming interested in provenance, people becoming interested in flavor again. And I think consumers began looking at vodka, and I'm nothing against vodka, but began looking at vodka going, well, how much more pure can it get? I want some flavor in here. And gin has always been sitting there kind of going, hello,
Over here, look over here.
over here, we started it. And so I think that's one motivation for it. And another reason, certainly in the UK, and I think to some extent in the US as well, is the growth of small-scale distillers, of craft distillers. And a lot of them trying to make or wanting to make whiskey, and whiskey obviously has to be matured, and then wanting something in terms of cash flow, simple as that, and going, well, actually, gin, we can make gin today and effectively sell it tomorrow. It's not easy to make, but we can do that. So you began to see this kind of new wave of small-scale distillers coming in. And the third factor, long answer, bartending. Bartenders looking back and going back to pre-prohibition cocktails and going, hang on a minute, all these drinks that we are making using a white spirit started off as gin drinks. So let's go back to gin. So yeah, there's a number of kind of complex reasons, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, you had a big job set out for you 5 years ago when you first did the gin book, figuring out which gins you wanted to spotlight and then tasting them in drinks. I would imagine that you had an even harder job this time. I mean, how many gins are there in the world right now, Dave?
I honestly don't know the answer to that.
But without exaggeration, it's thousands.
Well, it's thousands. It's thousands. I mean, I did a talk at a local food store on gin, and they asked. I lived down in the south of England, and they said, some of the gins, can you do local gins? Can you do Sussex gins? I went, yeah, fine, that's good. It's a good idea. And I did some Sussex gins, and I thought, well, that's pretty good. I've kind of ticked the box in terms of Sussex. And I got people coming up after it going, yeah, but have you tried this one? Have you tried that one? People making gins, and there's somebody making gin in his garage 3 miles away that I hadn't heard of. So they're popping up, constantly. It's impossible to keep tabs on it, I must admit, but it's good fun trying to keep tabs on it.
Yeah. So I noticed as I went through the book, now you kept some gins from the previous book in there, in the running, but you added new ones, and you also, certain ones that were in the first edition are not there anymore. So that must have been a hard job. How did you decide which gins to include and which to eliminate in the new edition?
Yeah, I know. It's at this point I have to say my apologies to those of you whose gins disappeared. I retained the gins which I felt were classics and which were markers. So markers for style. Well, the major brands always had to be there. So you always have to have Tanqueray, always have to have Gordon's, always have to have Beefeater, Sapphire, etc.
Yes.
They're always fixed. And then other gins which I felt were absolute clear markers of a style, they were retained. And then I had to widen the remit. So, it was a matter of sorry guys, but you've just got to make way for something else. Yeah, it had to be fairly brutal, I must admit. But you know, I would have preferred it if the book was twice the size it was, and I could have retained everything and just added more on. But you know, you've got
An encyclopedia,
by the number
4 times as long.
Yeah. So yeah, and again the same principle applied really. The gins which were coming in had to be representative of a style or of a country. I put out feelers to various friends around the world, asking them, I've got an idea about the best gins from your country, for example, but give me your opinion, and etc. etc. And also I wanted the gins to be juniper, if not juniper forward, then clearly representing juniper in their flavor. So I took out all flavored gins because they're just like flavored vodka.
You had some of them in the previous edition, but
yes,
they're all gone now.
Yeah, they've all gone. Because if you want to make slow gin, I mean, there's some good slow gin brands out there, but if you want to make slow gin, do it yourself. It's not that difficult to make a flavored gin yourself. I wanted to expand the Geneva section as well. So yeah, I picked gins which, as I said, juniper forward, or having a clear accent of juniper, and that then allowed me to kind of pick and choose which specific brands to pick. But even then, I'm kind of going, I really wish I'd had that one in. I'm still getting abuse from gin distillation. I know.
You can take it.
Yeah,
so yeah, you mentioned Geneva, which also has exploded in recent years. And I was just looking at the table of contents, which is very different from the old book to the new book. Now, you had some Genevers in the old book, but they were filed under other gins. But here you have a whole chapter for Geneva. Why is that? Is that just because there are so many more, or you wanted to give the category more attention?
Both. I think would be the fair answer to that. There has been an amazing revival in Geneva production in the Netherlands, which is so exciting. And I was never happy about the fact that it was there as other gins, because Geneva is not gin. Geneva is this missing link between whiskey and gin. It's more like whiskey than it is like gin, to be honest. I think I say in the book, actually, maybe whiskey should be called a non-aromatized Geneva, because it's a very, very different category, and there are many more examples of great Geneva now appearing on the market, and I really wanted to say, you've got to try this. It's a hugely exciting category. It makes sense, for those people. The book is for people who are interested in gin, who want to try gin at home or with friends, or spot gin brands behind the bar. It's also for bartenders if they want to, and actually just to try and spread the word about Geneva and say, this is an amazing spirit for making fantastic cocktails. So yeah, I really wanted to up the Geneva content, and probably could have done even more, to be perfectly honest.
Oh, I'm sure you could have. Now, you mentioned cocktails. Now, with every page in your book, you test every gin in certain cocktails. With the more traditional drink cocktails, you do a gin and tonic, a Negroni, a martini, and also with Sicilian lemonade. Is it your opinion that if a gin is going to be a successful gin, it has to work in classic cocktails?
I think it's a good test. Gin is, there's very few people who are going to drink neat gin, unless you're an exceptionally dry martini. So the whole point of the book, really, and this is kind of the whole point of the manual series, because there's a whiskey manual, a rum manual as well, is to go beyond what other really excellent books do, which is, this is what a gin tastes like. This is how to drink gin. And most people are going to be adding tonic water. Sicilian lemonade is like old style bitter lemon. I think it's a very good mixer. And how does it work in a martini? And how does it work in a Negroni? And if you want to balance it in a Negroni, how do you adjust the other ingredients within the Negroni to see if it balances. Not every gin works in every single one of these categories. Some are ideal with tonic, some are just made for tonic. Some of them don't work that well with tonic, but are amazing cocktail gins. And actually, this is one of the things which I found fascinating about this second tranche of gins I was tasting for the book. In the first edition, I would say the bulk of the gins I tried worked really well with the simple mixers, with the lengtheners like tonic water and Sicilian lemonade. Whereas in this new edition, you can see gin producers saying, we want this to be behind the bar. Suddenly people are drinking Negronis again, they're drinking martinis again. And they were much more amenable to those bigger, harder cocktails. But just because, and it's an important thing to remember about the book, just because a gin doesn't work as a martini doesn't mean it's bad gin. There's 125 gins in there, but I tasted 150. So it is the best of the best, which came out. So if something didn't quite cut it, then there's no point in having it in the book. But just because it's a great gin and tonic drink, but maybe not brilliant for a martini, have it as a gin and tonic. That's my suggestion. Very few gins worked perfectly and brilliantly with every single mixer, and that in itself I find really fascinating.
So tell us about your taste testing process. You have those 4 drinks that I mentioned. Like say you wake up in the morning, do you focus on one gin and taste it in all those cocktails, or do you do like all the martinis in a row? I mean, how
No, I'm not like you, Robert. What I would do would be I would organize by kind of category. And in this book, it kind of made sense to do it by the country divisions, which I've done. So there'd be days doing UK gins, days doing Australian, etc., etc. So I would nose and taste all the gins. So I would probably do about half a dozen at a time. I don't like tasting any more than about 6 spirits at any one time. So I'd nose and taste all the gins, neat and diluted as they are, take down the notes, and then after a rest, go back and do them with the mixers. And then I would take the bottles of gin and put them in the freezer, and then start doing a second lot, or even that might even be the next day, and do that again up to the mixer stage. And then I would have all this cold gin in the fridge or in the freezer. That would come out, and that would be used for doing the Negronis and then the martinis.
Okay.
So at any point, I would be tasting half a dozen Negronis, comparing and contrasting, and half a dozen martinis, comparing and contrasting, if that makes sense.
Were there any occasions that there was a gin that you tasted in the first book and then you tasted in the second book and you found your impressions had changed?
I think, no, I don't think anything changed significantly. I was pretty happy with. Oh yeah, I was pretty happy with my assessment in the first one. I think I was in the right ballpark with the second one, which for me is just pays great tribute to the amazing distillers, because gin is an incredibly difficult spirit to make, because you're dealing with organic ingredients. Your juniper harvest is going to be different every year. All the ingredients, all the botanicals in gin are going to be changing every year. So as a distiller, you're going to have to be changing the balance to enable to get consistency. So the fact that I could taste and go, actually, yeah, boom, that's Beefeater. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Or that's Plymouth, I'm happy with that. I think that's down to, it's not down to me being an amazing taster. That's down to the skill of the distiller.
There are some classic styles of gin, like London dry gin. There are a handful of them that, are easily identifiable. When you taste Beefeater or Tanqueray, you know that's a London dry. And you could even possibly say you could identify like a quote unquote New World gin just by tasting it. Could probably have some odd botanicals in it. Now that we have all these other countries that are specializing in gin, can you taste a German gin or an Australian gin and say, yes, that's an Australian gin for whatever reason?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that for me is the most fascinating thing that's happening with gin at the moment. That if you think about it from a historical perspective, and the book starts off with a condensed history of gin. But if you think of it, gin was the first global spirit or globalized spirit, insofar as the distillers, and if you include Geneva in this, and distillers in the Netherlands and distillers in England were importing their botanicals. So the gin was an expression of their mercantile empires, of the flavors of the world coming into these places and being distilled into this product. And what is happening now, and I think this very clearly is something that's happened within the past 5 years or so, is that when you do look at Japanese distillers, I mean, I've got a bottle of Kenobi here, for example.
Yes.
They're looking and they're saying, I want to make a gin, but yes, it has to be identifiably gin. So it's got to have juniper. It'll probably have to have coriander. It'll have to have some citrus. But wow, Japan's got the greatest range of citrus in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Let's use that. Let's use botanicals, which are native or endemic in our country, to give it a signature, a Japanese signature. And the same goes for Australia, because the botanicals in Australia are also off the scale. So I think what is happening is you're beginning to see this shift in thinking about gin, that gin can also now become almost like a localized spirit. So there will be some international elements in there. So the juniper is going to be there, some constants, but at the same time, the differences are going to be coming, I would say, from the local environment. So Kenobi, again, with Sancho, Sichuan pepper, with Yokoro tea. I've got Harris gin here from Scotland, which is a classic London dry, but they use sugar kelp as one of their botanical. And that just kind of takes it off into a really interesting little, very subtle kind of marine character, which very much ties into place. Never Never here as well. I'm drinking Never Never Negroni at the moment. That's from Adelaide. Never Never. Well, that's using, again, kind of classic botanicals, but then throwing in Australian coriander, which is intensely citric, pepperberry, and you're finding other Australian distillers using all manner of different, again, weird and wonderful botanical characters. So yeah, that I think is the major shift that has taken place, and you are beginning to see, yes, there is a kind of a style beginning to emerge. There's certainly a philosophical approach. Yeah. So I don't think all Australian gins are going to taste the same, but I think there's a philosophical approach. And when you taste them side by side, you kind of go, yeah, that's what that tastes like. Yeah.
That's kind of interesting, because it sort of turns the history of gin making on its head. I mean, the classic gins always drew their botanicals from all over the world. And now some of the newer gins are drawing some botanicals from right next door. I mean, it's exactly the opposite in a way.
Yeah, and it's really exciting. It means that what distillers are doing is kind of going out and paying attention to what grows around them, and finding the incredible flavors which actually exist around them. And those gins for me are the most exciting.
Now, you mentioned Harris gin. I'm unfamiliar with that one, but it's made on Harris Island. Is that right?
In the Isle of Harris, it comes in a very big bottle.
Now, I know they make Botanist on Islay. How many islands are making gin in Scotland now?
3, he said. Yes, 3 at the moment. Yeah, so Islay, Harris, and Orkney. So there's a gin coming out of Orkney, which is excellent. Yeah. So, and there's distilleries planned for a couple of other islands. So
it's very interesting how much Scotland has turned into.
There's one in Skye as well. Sorry.
Because, we think of Scotland, we think of Scotch, just naturally. But now there are hundreds of gins in Scotland. You tell a nice story in your book about how, you were first a whiskey guy and you drank whiskey. But when you started talking to the distillers in Scotland, you found out that their first drink of the night was always gin. And you realized these people were open to gin, and it sort of opened your mind to gin. But now the whole country's mind is open to gin.
Yeah.
I mean, it's quite of a remarkable story, isn't it, for Scotland?
It's an extraordinary story, but I mean, you have to remember, I think the toughest market in the world to try and sell whiskey is Scotland, you know, so yeah, but yeah, and it did always, I suppose it did surprise me, you know, to begin with. I began going to distilleries and, you know, think, well, they're bound to have a dram before dinner, and everybody's like, oh no, gin and tonic. Yeah.
Is there a gin? What's the most popular gin in Scotland? Do you know?
It will probably still be Gordon's
Gordon.
or Sapphire, I would say.
Yeah.
But Edinburgh gin is coming up fast on the rails, and that's becoming very popular.
Okay. I was glad you included the UK proof Gordons in the book. The Gordons we have here in the United States isn't much to talk about because it's, you know, at a lower ABV. But whenever I go to London, I always pick up a couple bottles of the higher proof and bring it home.
Yeah, and yeah, because you know, alcohol carries flavor. You know, then as you know, and as soon as you cut gin below 40%, you lose the top notes. You know, you lose. You know, it just kills it. All those more volatile aromas, boom, they just disappear. So gin has to be at a higher strength. And there are some gins which are coming in at a fairly ferocious strength at the moment. But yeah, quite definitely, you know, one of my recommendations to anybody new on gin, you know, always stick to something 40% or above. 43 and above, even better, I would say.
I'd like to draw on a question from one of our viewers. It's from Audrey Saunders, the bar owner and bartender, who's probably done as much as anybody in the United States for turning Americans back onto gin through the drinks that she served at Pegu Club. She says, in talking with Desmond Payne, the distiller at Beefeater, they contract with farmers and bulk purchase their botanicals through multi-year contracts. Do we see climate change dramatically affecting the quality of those botanicals in the future?
I would say undoubtedly yes. I don't know how much study has gone into that, but quite definitely yes. I think that is an absolute and sad inevitability. And it should be something that the gin industry is looking at. Whether it is, I'm afraid, I don't know. I know it's something the Scotch whisky industry is looking at in terms of trying to future-proof barley supplies. But yeah, and it is. Yeah,
have to worry about right now.
Yeah, it will happen. I mean, you know, and you know, the barley supplies or wheat supplies, etc., for your neutral grain, that's going to be affected as well. You know, climate change is impacting on absolutely everything. So yeah, it will. It will undoubtedly have an impact, and needs to be examined, needs to be addressed.
Take another question from Adam Park. What's that?
I was just saying hello to Audrey.
Oh, hi, Audrey. Adam Park asks if many gins are using local juniper. As we know, most gins, you know, get their juniper from far, far away from where they are distilled. Are there any gins that get their juniper down the road?
The only one I know who uses local juniper in the UK, thank you, Adam. I knew he was going to try and trip me up at some point. Is a gin called Heppel.
Heppel is delicious.
Northumberland, Nick Strangeways gin in Northumberland, and that is on in the estate. The Heppel estate has its own juniper, and they're planting new juniper, so they grow their own juniper there, so they can harvest. So some of the juniper is coming from their own estate. Lussa gin. Oh, there's another island. Sorry, I forgot Jura. The island Jura in Scotland has a gin. A lot of their botanicals are actually local, so they're using local juniper. I don't know anybody that's using 100%. You know, I would think. I mean, the problem with juniper in the UK is that it has been affected by blight, so it's in a fairly parlous state. So there's various attempts being made to try and regenerate juniper. So I wouldn't know any UK distiller who could be able to use 100% local. I would suspect in countries where juniper grows more easily, that's entirely possible. So something like Italy or Central Europe,
Yeah.
that would that would be possible. But to be perfectly honest, I don't know anybody that's doing 100%. But certainly Hepburn and Lussa do. Thank you, Adam.
Good. A question from Elizabeth Archer. We were talking about the various cocktails you tested the gins in, and she wondered, I mean, what are the elements that a gin would have to make it marry better in, say, a gin and tonic? I mean, what is a good gin and tonic gin? What does that gin have to have?
The gin for a good, it's a fantastic question. The gin for a gin and tonic, I think, has to have brightness. So for me, a gin and tonic gin works well when it has, perhaps it's been dialed up a little in terms of citrus rather than the heavier, rootier aromas. So lower levels of angelica and orris, perhaps slightly less of the piney element of juniper, and more of that kind of bright, fresh, vibrant character you're going to be getting from your citrus, and indeed from your coriander as well. And I think that just helps to give that lift, you know. So when you pick up that glass of gin and tonic and you inhale, it's kind of boom, you know, it's there immediately. So you want that immediacy, you want that mouth-watering quality. So yeah, those slightly lighter, more citric characters, I would say, really carry through well for a gin tea. Great question, really good question.
Here's a very simple question from Paige Hammock. This one's going to put you on the spot, Dave. What's your favorite gin and a Negroni? You have
You
you
have to buy the book.
What?
I'm not going to tell you. Otherwise, you're going to if you buy the book and you can find out. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, is it in there though? You will say that? Okay, I have to look for that. Well, that guy, probably you won't answer the question that I was going to ask you. Well, what is your desert island gin? Say you're stuck on a desert island for the rest of your life. You can only drink one gin. Which one is it?
That is tough.
I kind of think your book answers the question, because there's only one gin that you gave all 5s on all 4 cocktails.
Oh, I can't even remember what that. What was that? Was that Hipple?
No, it was a Beefeater, actually.
Beefeater. There we go. Yeah, Hipple was close. Yeah, Beefeater. Yeah, to be honest, Beefeater.
Yeah, it would be mine too.
It kind of be between the two, to be honest. And it's funny, when I'm doing classes, you know, the gin classes and stuff. You know, people always want to try something new, try something fresh. But in any kind of gin tasting that I do, I will always have Tanqueray to be able to go, look, that's what juniper is. Boom, that's juniper forward. And I will always have Beefeater. It's go, okay, right, here's juniper, but here's that kind of lighter, more vibrant citric thing coming through as well. Those are your markers. And the number of people who have come up after classes going, oh God, you know, I've never tried Beefeater. And it's fascinating what they're saying. They're saying, I've always ignored Beefeater because it's too cheap. You know, because people are now used to paying £40 for a bottle of gin. And Beefeater's coming in at significantly less, maybe half that price. Yeah. And people kind of go, oh, yeah, it's a cheap gin. It's not, it's a brilliant gin.
I think people tend to underestimate some of the legacy brands. You know, they've been around so long that they forget about them, or you know, maybe the older generation drank them, so they think they must not be very interesting or something.
It's the same in any spirit category. You know,
that's right.
There's a really good reason that Johnny Walker sells 18 million cases a year. You know, it's because it's really good whiskey. There's a really good reason that Tanqueray and Beefeater sell as many cases as they do, because they're really good gins.
Another question, of all the gins that are out there, that have been around a while, what do you think is the most underappreciated brand, a brand that just doesn't get the attention that it ought to?
In terms of the UK, I would say Hayman's. Hayman's, which is just a classic family-owned, London dry style, juniper forward, rock solid, absolutely rock solid gin. And just, I mean, for some reason, boom, you know, it's not as well known as it should be. So within the UK, I would definitely say, you know, Hayman's, amazing gin.
Yeah, we get that here too, and I know a lot of gin lovers who love that a lot.
Yeah, no, it's
Heyman's makes a Navy strength, the Overproof gin.
they
Yeah,
do, and it's
yeah, and
be
there are
careful.
quite a few of them out there
Yeah.
now at this point. At one point, that category was sort of extinct, but it's come back. What do you think is the proper use for Overproof gin? How should you drink
Carefully.
it? I guess I set you up for that one.
Yeah, I mean, it does. I mean, I wouldn't use overproof in a gin and tonic. You know, it's a cocktail gin for me.
Mhm.
But you have to be aware. You have to be aware of the strength. You have to, if you're having it in a martini, you've got to use less or stir it right down. Give it plenty of dilution. The flavors are still going to be there. Yeah. So yeah, treat it with respect. But yeah, definitely more cocktail, more Negroni led, more martini led, more Martinez, Turf Club, whatever. Yeah.
Here's a question from Mary Kate Murray, who also happens to be my wife. Um, she asked, we all know the story. We've met people who say, I don't drink gin. They had a bad experience in childhood or something and they'll never touch it again or whatever. What is it about gin that makes anybody say, oh no, I don't drink gin? What do you suspect when you hear that line?
What I suspect is just what you've outlined there, Robert, which is that unfortunate early incident where you probably drank too much at a young age. I've got a 19-year-old daughter, and she doesn't actually drink. She's she just doesn't drink, but because she's my daughter, at any party she is usually designated to be the person that makes the drinks, and she kind of made. She was at a party recently, and she made gin and tonics for her friends of roughly the same age. You're allowed to drink at age 19 in the UK, folks. But she made them the strength that I drink them. Well, I will draw a veil over what happened, after that. And probably some of these young ladies will think that, yeah, I'm never going to touch gin again in my life. So there's often a trigger at that. Some people just don't like the smell of juniper, to be honest. I think people might just find it a bit too aromatically intense. But there's one way that you can wean yourself back onto it, because your olfactory system and your memory are very closely linked and very close together in your brain. And what you've got to do is actually try and fool your memory into thinking that it likes it. So your memory's overriding your olfactory system because, oh, I remember that smell, don't like it. And just, if you want to start drinking gin again, after years of refusing to because of that unfortunate incident, open a bottle, buy a half bottle, open a bottle, smell it, put it away. The next day, have a tiny little bit, and then a tiny little bit more the day after, and a tiny little bit more the day after. And by the end of like a week to 10 days, you'll be drinking gin. So that's the way I would do it. The other thing, which I found really fascinating about the way that people's attitude, and some of it I think is almost like societal attitude, that my very first book was about spirits in general. And I used to do gin. One of the talks I would be giving would be on gin. And this is when gin was still pretty much in doldrums. So it was a tough gig. And at the end or during the class or at the end of the class, people would go, why does gin make me cry?
What?
That was the big question. Gin makes me cry. Gin makes me depressed. And ever since gin's become popular, I have not had that question. I've not heard that question for years now. But that used to be, I could guarantee that I'd be asked that question a number of times.
I think they were confused. They were actually crying tears of joy because they were drinking gin.
So,
They didn't understand. Speaking of juniper, Bruno Ferrari asks, because you have said that you think gins should be juniper forward. How much is too much juniper, and how much is too little?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. The legal definition for gin is it should have a predominant taste of juniper. How do you define it? The key about any spirit, any drink is balance. So you always have to have balance. You always have to have complexity. And the complexity comes from the interplay between all of these different botanicals, the way that they're working together. And that is also the essence of the balance itself. So if one element of the gin is out of kilter, so if juniper has been dialed up to a really high extent so that you can't actually taste what's going on underneath, all you're going to be getting is this kind of assault of terpenes, and it's like, kind of getting lost in a, pine forest. It's just going to become overwhelming. The gin's going to become too oily. It's going to be unbalanced. So that would be too much. Too little would be, where's the juniper? You're kind of going,
Right.
lovely drink, but I cannot identify this as being a gin. It's a really interesting flavored vodka, but it's not a gin. So if you don't get that juniper note, that kind of heathery, sage, piney character coming through, then for me, it's not really a gin. But equally, if you've dialed that juniper up to that extent where you're getting that kind of oily, it might throw a really heavy louche. I don't mind a louche as long as there's balance. Louche is when you add water to it or tonic to it and it goes cloudy.
Yeah.
But you have to have that balance. So yeah, those would be the two ends of that scale. Lovely question. Thank you.
Staying on the botanical issue, Shayla McKee says she really enjoys heavily botanical gins.
Mm-hmm.
And she wants to know, what's the best way to explore those gins in drinks? Which drinks should you use those really heavily botanical gins?
Heavy botanicals. I would definitely go. I would go martini. Yeah,
Martini.
I would say that you know more about martinis than I do. You're an amazing book on martini. But there's nowhere to hide in a martini, and that's one reason I wanted to test every gin out, like I road test the gin as a martini, because it's all exposed. You can really assess the balance in a gin in a martini. So if you like those kind of really intense big ones, that would be the testing ground for me. How does it cope in that scenario? It's not covered up. I'm drinking Negroni at the moment. Negroni's a tricky drink for the gin to get through, but a heavy botanical gin Negroni, that's going to come out and that's going to work in a different way. But martini is exposed. Everything is exposed. The balance, the complexity, the flaws. So yeah, that would be my test.
Yeah, no place to hide for the gin there. Elizabeth Archer wants to know if you have any favorite gins from South Africa or Canada.
And I got a couple actually from South Africa in the book, which I'm just checking.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Yeah, because the South African botanicals are extraordinary. So I'm just kind of to geometric. I thought was really nice, which is juniper, buchu leaves. So there's the local, and Pinar and Son, the Empire Gin in there, kaffir lime leaves with cucumber. So that is, I think those are really nice gins. Where was the other? Oh, Canada.
Canada.
Really like sharing them. They do a couple of fascinating gins. One which is called Kazuki, which I'm just looking at here, which is their spin on a Japanese style, so using Sakura, and also one called Seaside, which is one of a number of gins which is using seaweed in there. That is really good. And another one which came out, and this is thanks to our dear friend Davin de Kergamo, who helped me out with some of these. There was a couple. One Circa from Paul Circa, which is from Montreal, which has got such a vast array of botanicals, but local botanicals, pine needles, etc. And another one, which comes probably the worst bottle of all, called Queensborough, which is from BC in Surrey, and Rocky Mountain juniper. So there we are. There's somewhere might be using local, but also using spruce tips, vanilla pods, and some hops in it. The bottle really doesn't look great. It is an awesomely good gin. So yeah, some really good stuff happening in Canada.
Let's sticking to countries. Another person, David Zatz, asks if there are any good gins coming out of Italy.
I tried a couple in there from the Professore guys from the Jerry Thomas bar, which are just really, really beautiful. But taking gin off into this very Italian, Northern Italian, almost think of gin almost like a vermouth. And they were really fascinating. There are a few coming out of Italy. It's beginning to come. I think it's as exciting what's happening with vermouth, actually, vermouth and bitters in Italy, as it is with gin. So something closely aligned with gin is happening over there. I would say every country in the world is making good gin at the moment.
And speaking of vermouth, of course, vermouth, the other major ingredient in the martini. Somebody asks, how much effort do you put in? You've chosen your gin. You're going to have a martini. How much thought and effort do you put into choosing the vermouth to go with that gin?
I mean, for the book, I stuck to Neuprat for martinis, and I stuck to Cocky for the Negroni, and indeed for Turf Club and Martinez. Because if I'd begun to play around with different vermouths, yeah, I would still be working my way through it. So I had to draw a line on it. But personally speaking, I do play around a little bit, and I think again it's about this balance. So if you've got a big bold gin, you can afford to have a bigger and bolder sweet vermouth with it. If you have a more delicate gin, you perhaps want to dial that vermouth down a little bit so it's more gentle, slightly lighter, slightly softer. You can even move to a rosato, at more extreme elements. Within a Negroni, yeah, Campari is always going to be there, but sometimes with the lighter gins, Aperol would work as well. So again, it's a matter of finding that balance. So finding the vermouth and then thinking about the weight of the vermouth, thinking about the complexity of the vermouth, so that it's not going to kill the gin. The two elements are going to be complemented. A Negroni is a gin drink, so you've got to be able to say there's gin coming through in that. And one of the things I've done in the book is, and this is why having different vermouths would have made it absolutely impossible, is shifting the balance of the Negroni to match the style of the gin, because classically Negroni is equal parts. But if you've got a light gin,
yes,
Campari and sweet vermouth they're big, bold flavors, and the gin's going to disappear. So you've got to rebalance it. If you've got a real big kind of juniper forward one, that's fine. That's not a problem. So there's 4 different grades of Negronis that I kind of play around with. And the same with the martini. I did everything at 4-1, but also we'd also try it 5-1 and just kind of play around the balance. I don't know if that fully answered the question, but for me, the key is always balance. And if you're using something for a mixed drink, for a cocktail, think about what that ingredient is and how that's going to complement.
Yeah, makes sense. We've been talking about botanicals. There are certain botanicals which are classical to gin, juniper, obviously, but also things like coriander and citrus and angelica root. Now, with all the new gins, a lot of them often, to distinguish themselves, they'll choose an unusual botanical, say, we've got this, and this makes ours different. And so Kirsten Swartz asks, of these new botanicals that have been popping up in the past 10 years, are there any real winners? Like one we hadn't thought of before, but like is really working well in gin, and you're seeing it and you like what it's doing?
Yeah, I think it kind of it depends where you are. I think in Japan, Sansho, which I mentioned earlier, that Sichuan pepper, which is actually, it's not pepper, it's actually part of the citrus family. So it's got that kind of slightly mouth-numbing but really intense character. That is giving real amazing character. So I like that. I quite like what's happening with seaweed.
Mhm.
So I've seen that in Canada, in Scotland, also in Australia as well with Manly. Hard to cope with, but I find that really quite exciting.
Mhm.
And I think the underlying thing about that for me, it kind of comes back to that whole thing about gin being a difficult spirit to make, because you've got so many different balances and different ingredients and internal balances to work out. It is quite easy to overemphasize the botanical. So you've got your base, and your base is maybe a classic London dry base. So you've got coriander, juniper, Orris angelica, citrus peel. Boom. And then you go, well, I'm going to make my gin different. So I'm going to add cardamom, for example. And you go, fine, it's got to taste like cardamom. So boom, so the cardamom's dialed up and the balance is gone, because that's all you can taste. You've ruined that balance to it. And I found it less so this time, but certainly I did find it 5 years ago with a lot of the new gins which were coming out, that they were trying a bit too hard to try and show off that botanical, and losing the balance. I mean, it's one reason I really like Harris, is that that sugar kelp, which could easily dominate, is just, it sits there and it only really appears in the finish. It's kind of, oh, hang on a minute, where's that kind of slight, it's not even salty, it's kind of this minerality. Where's that
Mhm.
suddenly come from? It's just kind of taken it off in a very subtle way. I've got another Geneva here from Baruta, which is the old Simon, and that uses, I mean, it's only part of that is Geneva, so it's not all, not 100% redistilled with botanicals, but they use roasted hazelnut and roasted walnut in there. And again, just very, very subtly, just adding, because the nuttiness of the spirit and then that sweet nuttiness of the botanical just kind of moves it off in a slightly different direction. So having said that, actually, I would love to see kind of more nutty things coming through.
Oh, not yeah. That's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
We have another question from Audrey Saunders.
Audrey.
Yeah, this is a red letter day. She says, with these, it's a two-part question. With these modern gins, are you seeing an increased number of gins that are enhanced, meaning the flavors are added post-distillation versus classic distillation? That's the first part. Also, are you seeing more gins where each of the botanicals are distilled separately and then the distillates blended together later?
I would say yes in both cases. I know you probably want me to expand on that slightly. I think what you're now seeing is people beginning to experiment with distillation approaches to distillation. So yeah, there will be some which are then added back in. I mean, Harris, again, good example. No, actually, that's a complete lie. Sorry, Harris do it in a different way. So they actually steep that sugar kelp in the spirit, take it out before they put the botanicals in. So essentially, the neutral spirit now is infused with that sugar kelp, and then that's redistilled. So that's one interesting way of doing it. You will find some distillers who are distilling in every individual botanical separately and blending at the end. Kenobi, and I'm saying all these because I've got these bottles in front of me, but Kenobi have grouped their botanicals into 6 different groupings. So there's a citric one, there's a spicy one, etc., etc. And they are all then distilled separately. They all have their own separate cut points. So the technique is slightly different to all of them. And then all of them are then blended together. And that ratio within the blending might shift slightly because of the nature of the botanical, nature of the harvest, etc., to achieve that overall balance. You've got somebody like, again, like Heppel or a number of distillers who are using rotovap, so vacuum distillation, which will be used for like one botanical, perhaps. Botanical, which might be slightly more fragile, that wouldn't necessarily work within a still, could be distilled in a rotovap and then blended in at the end. Another thing that Heppel are doing is something called supercritical distillation, which is distilling under CO2, which extracts, you can really fine tune it and get very, very specific aromatic molecules essentially coming out. So a huge number of different techniques getting used. I've got no problem with these as long as the final product is complex and balanced and has character. I think all of that is absolutely valid. I think the old days of simply just adding artificial essences, thankfully, has gone.
We're getting towards the end of the hour. I think we have time for a couple more quick questions. Somebody asked, gins, have different base spirits, base neutral spirits. What do you think about gins that are derived from grapes as opposed to grain?
You will notice that. And the interesting thing about a base spirit is that even though it is technically neutral, you will notice a different character coming through.
Yeah, of course.
So yes, you will notice the base spirit for a grape-based gin will be lighter and more aromatic. So it will have a more slightly more perfumed character compared to wheat, for example, or whey, which Bertha's Revenge uses in Ireland. That gives this it's a real. But it's got weight to it, it's got a creamy weight to it,
Yeah.
No great surprise, yeah. So the base spirit is really, really important.
Okay.
Really important. And then one thing that I'm beginning to see is that some distillers are making their own neutral spirit, but not because they don't have the equipment, can't get it to neutral. But so the base spirit actually has flavor and weight to it. And which is interesting, but they're trying to make a London Dry style, or effectively a London Dry style, of this base spirit that actually has a huge amount of flavor. And if you wanted to do that and you want to flavor in your base spirit, then make Geneva. You're halfway there. Just keep going down that route rather than trying to force it into something that doesn't work, because it becomes slightly muddy. You don't get the precision, So the base spirit's got an influence. The rice spirit that's used for Kenobi, for example, it has an influence. It has a textural quality more than a flavor, but it is effectively this base that all the other aromatic compounds are going to be playing off. And that's what you want in a dry gin. And if you want to make a Geneva, make a Geneva, because you want that base spirit to come through.
Well, let me ask you finally, one of the largest growing segments of the gin market is pink gin. Seems everyone has a pink gin these days. The pink color is derived from berries or rose petals or any number of things. There aren't many rules to it. What do you think of this category? Is this good for gin or bad for gin? Pink gin.
I think it's an inevitability. I think they're overly sweetened. I think I worry about them, to be perfectly honest, because I think the whole flavored gin thing is a bit like the whole flavored vodka. And you're seeing more and more outrageous flavors coming in, which you saw in vodka, and that was kind of the end of the vodka category. But I do think there's a pink gin consumer, and I think there's a dry gin consumer, and I don't think that they necessarily cross over a great deal. I'm not a big fan, to be honest. That's one reason I didn't put them in the book. But I understand that there's a good commercial necessity for having them, but it's not my favorite style, put it that way.
And finally, from Adam Park, are we going to see another revision in 5 years?
Just because he wants to help me drink all that gin. Who knows? Who can tell? I mean, at the moment, my dear friends, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow for less than 5 years' time.
True. We're going to need all that gin.
Yeah, well, you never know. Gin may, I just keep.
So, I think all our friends out in Seattle are hopefully getting to the end of their 3 martini lunch that they've been having to watch this. So I just want to remind them, this is the book, Gin and How to Drink It by Dave Broome. Go out and buy it at your local independent bookstore. It's highly entertaining, highly useful book if you like to drink gin, or if you'd like to drink any kind of drink that has gin in it.
Yes, and thank you so much, Robert and Dave, for your time, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
It was an absolute
Absolutely.
treat. I really enjoyed it.
No, it was really fun. Thank you. I'm excited to go drink gin now.
Yeah.
Seriously. And I have a question, just one. I have a pound or a couple pounds of damsons and I'm going to make damson gin. What gin should I use?
I would say Beefeater. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, beefeater.
Excellent.
Beefeater.
Thank you so much.
Desmond,
Congratulations.
I want my check.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was going to say.
I'll accept bottles. I will accept bottles.
Thank you so much, both of you. Have a lovely evening and afternoon.
Everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having me.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.